This past weekend, I attended the Inquiry Educators Summit hosted by Toddle. It was totally free and totally worthwhile, with a lineup of the best international speakers in the inquiry space. Today, I want to pick out some of the most pertinent points from the summit to share with you in this episode. In fact, today I'm just going to focus on what Trevor MacKenzie shared in his session. Hello and welcome to Blooming Curious, the podcast that's all about nurturing that natural curiosity in our early years kids and students. I'm Edwina, your host and a passionate advocate for play and inquiry, and on a mission to keep children curious and asking questions. The days of talk and chalk are over. We're diving into a world of integrated inquiry and nature-based learning and exploring strategies that create lifelong learners. So if you're a classroom or homeschool educator or even a curious parent, then this is the place for you. This past weekend, I attended the Inquiry Educators Summit hosted by Toddle. It was totally free and totally worthwhile, with a lineup of the best international speakers in the inquiry space. Today, I want to pick out some of the most pertinent points from the summit to share with you in this episode. In fact, today I'm just going to focus on what Trevor MacKenzie shared in his session, and in next week's episode, I'll unpack Kath Murdoch's session. So make sure you subscribe and follow so that you'll be reminded when next week's episode is published. Trevor MacKenzie's session was around his new book, The Inquiry Mindset Questions Edition, and it really went to the heart of how we plan for curiosity. If you've been following this podcast or you're a subscriber to my newsletter, Get Curious, you'll know that asking questions really is the basis for curiosity. And if you want to get on my mailing list and get curious, then I'll leave a link for you in the show notes so that you can just sign up there. I've spoken at length about how children's curiosity is waning over time, and with that, unfortunately, comes fewer and fewer questions being asked. And if children or we as adults aren't asking questions, well, then unfortunately it's an indication that their and our curiosity is not particularly healthy. Trevor highlighted the fact that our values shape our teaching, and in fact everything we do. The common set of values that inquiry educators share are curiosity, agency, independence, skills, and relevance. And these are the values that I've been talking about in just about every episode. Curiosity drives everything we do. Without curiosity, life is just plain dull and boring. And if there's no curiosity, there's no interest in learning. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you aren't curious, then the children you teach aren't going to be curious either. Curiosity is infectious. The way we get children more curious is through modeling our own curiosity. And the way we trigger children's curiosity, apart from modeling it, is not just by asking questions, but getting children to ask questions and to wonder about the world around them. And when we think about those other values, agency, independence, the learning of skills and relevance to our lives today, these are all values that every good educator should be bringing into the classroom. If children don't feel they have agency, that what they think or value doesn't matter, that they've never given a choice, they're not going to be engaged, are they? If someone were to walk into your classroom or teaching space today, would they clearly see that agency and independence and relevance is something you value? Because our spaces, our environment, the third teacher, reflects our values. So perhaps as you sit down today, look around your space with curiosity and take a moment to reflect and ask yourself what you value about teaching and learning, and what does your space and the children's work that is up there reflect about your values? Are you being true to your values? Or perhaps by looking at your space you realize that it doesn't reflect agency or curiosity or independence. And what a wonderful realization and opportunity this is then to make changes to the way you approach your teaching. These are the moments to celebrate. These breakthrough moments that reflect our own curiosity and thinking. And imagine sharing these light bulb moments with students so that they too can reflect on and apply it to their own learning. Now that's real learning, and that's also a little bit of metacognition going on. As educators, our whole mission should be around how to keep the children in our care curious. And I actually have a little free resource about how we naturally keep children curious when we're doing simple things, like just going for a walk. I'll leave a link to it in the show notes. I also have another free resource for you, which I'm going to mention at the end of this episode, so you've got to keep listening because it's a biggie. Trevor furthermore simplified the inquiry cycle, where basically the way we spark that curiosity is through the provocations we set up. And this is exactly what I discussed with Victoria Crossan in episode 42, where we unpack the difference between provocations and invitations. And also in episode 33, where I chatted to April Zyko about provocations. Go and listen to those episodes after this one. I'll leave a link in the show notes so that you can be reminded. It's our provocations that spark questions and wondering. Of course, it all starts with knowing our curriculum first, because our provocations should be linked to the curriculum. Trevor's book gives us 10 questioning routines that we can use to get students to ask questions. And of course, as he says, the stronger our provocations are, the better the questions are that we're going to get from kids. The questions that the children ask are basically our formative evidence. We base our next steps and our planning on the types of questions that the children ask. Their questions will tell us what they need. I wrote a blog post titled How Questions Lead to Curiosity and Knowledge, which I'll link for you in the show notes. You might want to have a read of that. Trevor spoke about the importance of co-designing open and closed questions with our students, using word banks so that the students can use that vocabulary, which of course is linked to your curriculum, in their questions, and also adding in our own questions. So you can see that inquiry isn't a separate thing. It's actually linked to our curriculum. So it doesn't take up any extra time. It's part of what you're already doing. And he reminded us that an important part of inquiry is to plan for movement, collaboration, and give kids time for thinking. That means the children need to get out of their seats. Yep, they do need to get out of their seats. Using strategies where they have to move, for example, to put a sticky note up on a chart. Or perhaps if you're using a technique like 4 corners, where children have to move to a corner where there's a statement they agree with. Basically, not just being glued to a chair, but having opportunities that allow our students to move. Collaborative learning is also really big in an inquiry classroom. And actually, this technique prepares children for the future, where everything we do now is in teams, even university assignments. We have to learn to work with others, and it's a soft skill that employers really look for now. And then giving children that space to think. He spoke about the power of the pause, for us to be quiet, because teachers love talking and listening to their own voices. That's why perhaps some of us have become teachers, because we just love to talk. But we have to give children a moment so that they can think, and then provide for them an opportunity perhaps to turn and talk, or stop and jot, or do a 4 corners where they can show their thinking. Trevor then also gave us some examples of questioning routines from his book. These examples are all practical, they're all doable, and not only do they align with the values of inquiry, but they also value collaboration, movement, and giving children that thinking time. I'd really recommend you get the book if you haven't already got it. I'll make it super easy for you. Just click on the link in the show notes. It is an Amazon affiliate link, which means that I'll get a few pennies at no extra cost to you. So go ahead and click the link and start implementing those question routines in your classroom ASAP. I mentioned earlier that I have a free resource for you. We all stand on the shoulders of giants before us. When I started teaching early childhood, I was actually teaching through an inquiry lens. It was something so natural to me, but I didn't know that it had a name. I then started reading Kath Murdoch's books, and I went on Claire Warden's course, and I started noticing that my implementation was actually quite structured, even though it's always been very fluid. When other teachers started visiting my room to check out how I was implementing inquiry, I started realizing that perhaps I was onto something, which of course has led me to Blooming Curious and starting this podcast. And I've come to realize that so many of you actually really want to implement inquiry-based learning, but you just don't know how. Or you're afraid it's going to add to your already overwhelming workload. Or you're worried that it's going to be chaotic. So what I've done is, I've created an e-guide to help educators just like you get started with inquiry. It takes you through the steps that you need to consider to get started. And funnily enough, it's exactly the steps that Trevor talked about. The e-guide is called Inquiry 101. It used to be for sale on my website, but I've decided to give it away to you for free so that you can just get started. Because ultimately we're educators because we want the best for children. And I truly believe inquiry is what's best for children. I've seen it time and time again. It will change the way you teach and the way your students learn. It will be the very best and most exciting thing you can do for your teaching practice. So to download Inquiry 101 and get it delivered right into your inbox for free, you just go to resources.bloomingcurious.com/inquiry-101. I'll leave the link in the show notes for you. And if you have this guide and you have Trevor's book, you'll be onto a winning recipe for success. I really appreciate you sticking around. And can I just ask that if you enjoyed this episode, you click that share button and share it with a fellow teacher or parent. That's the only way this podcast can grow. So please share it. And if you could also leave a review, that would be amazing. Reviews really help push podcasts higher up the rankings where more people will see them. And that's really something the world needs to see. A podcast about keeping kids curious, don't you think? So until next week, when I'll be sharing what Kath Murdoch shared at the summit, stay blooming curious.